Good evening. My name is Rea Saxena, and I am the Public Programs Intern at the Museum of Anthropology at UBC. It is a great honor to be presenting our Women's History Month event today and to simultaneously also be hosting a kickoff to the very first of our new series of live events under the title Artists Unscripted. I hope everyone can hear me right now. Please feel free to drop any questions and or any technical difficulties that you run into in the chat. I'd firstly like to start off the event by acknowledging that MOA is on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. More so, I would like to emphasize that land acknowledgements are a way to incite a call to action. I'm honored to be in the presence of the three women who will be our panelists for today, our gracious artists, who will be sharing their knowledge, their insights, and their talent, their voices with us today. I hope that you enjoy this evening full of poetry and art, celebrating the feminine and especially women of color today. I'd like to acknowledge, hi Deborah. Deborah, can I ask you to mute yourself, please? Thank you.
I did.
No
you know
worries.
what? I can't hear you very well.
Okay, maybe I'll speak up a little bit.
No, I think it's me, but I can't hear you very well. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, Deborah.
Oh, great. I don't hear you very well, but I guess I don't need to. Are we ready to go?
We are ready to go. We are in the middle of the event at the moment. We have 44 people with us today. I'm gonna mute you for a bit, Deborah, if that's all right with you.
Pardon?
I'm just gonna mute your audio, if that's all right with you.
I can't hear you very well at all.
Okay, how about I let Jill Baird, who I will introduce now, is the head of the Department of Public Programs. If you run into any technical difficulties, Jill will take over below. Okay. I don't even know where I was. Hi, Jill. Yeah, I'm honored to be in the presence of the three women who are our panelists today. I'd like to start off by acknowledging what is happening in the world right now, the reality that we live in. I'm speaking in light of anti-Asian racism and misogyny, the systematic ideologies that are at the root of perpetuating and continuing violent acts that are rooted in colonial practices. I think for today, themes surrounding our ancestors and finding a place through art that reflects on intergenerational trauma and sacred space. That's the crux of what we will be discussing today through our panelists. And I'm so excited and ready to learn more about how our artists work with restorative practices and speculative futures. It's so exciting and inspiring to be among some wonderful women today and getting to talk with them further. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to type them into the chat below and I will try my best to address them in the Q&A section of this event as well. So we will be starting it off with a self-taught Salish weaver and jewelry maker, an artist and a knowledge keeper from Musqueam, Deborah Sparrow, who will be sharing a few words about her thoughts on our theme today and give a welcoming speech. And at this point, Deborah, I'll hand over the virtual mic to you. The floor is all yours. Deborah, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you. So you can hear me loud and clear, eh?
I can, yes.
Okay, it's a little frustrating on this end because I can't hear you very well at all. So I don't know what's going on. But whatever's going on, let's just go ahead and can you close the door, please? I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for asking me actually to come forward and share and join with you today on our traditional territories here in Musqueam. I'm here in Musqueam in my home where I reside and create all my beautiful work with the permission of my ancestors who I hold very dearly to my heart and soul as I work along. I also would like to acknowledge and thank the museum and Moa and Jill and her crew and team who always do come forward in acknowledging the important relationship that we have in the land that we live in. And I think that that is one of the most important relationships when it comes to understanding where we are today, that we miss in this world so much the value of what protocol means. And it's not always a political statement, it's actually an acknowledgement of the land that you live in and respecting deeply the people who you do share this land with today. And there is so much going on today as I watch over this last year how things have unfolded. I feel a real deep sense of sadness for humanity in a way of how we have moved forward and really not balancing our histories, no matter which histories we come from, with this modern world that we live in. And we've allowed the technology and we've allowed the ways in which assimilation through our favorite word, colonialism, has done to all of us. I am not redirecting that at any specific people. It's just a fact that assimilation has brought us to where we are today. And I think I'm happy and excited to be here with you today because I know out of your conversations, many good things will come. Because, you know, in one small way, no, actually it's a big way, women are holders of knowledge. It was International Women's Month. And, you know, it's the way in which we are beginning to take our steps towards the responsibilities of balancing the worlds that we live in. So when we talk of tradition and the values that we had as women and balancing them with today in looking at being equal with our counterparts, no matter in which way it is, whether it's through our workforce, our sports force, our ways in which we look at our worlds today. I think we're moving very slowly towards a better understanding. And I think women today are really taking their place. They always have, but it's been hard to stand in it when you're being pushed from one way to the other way. But because we're so rooted and strong in who we are, it doesn't matter which way we're pushed, we'll stand again. And I think that that's what's so important and valuable. I would like to bring in my dearest, a beautiful woman that I met, you know, some years back now, and she's left our world to go into the spirit world. And you all know her as the wonderful Maya Angelou, who like to share the statement that says that she quotes, that we're as much alike as we are different. And so let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate our differences and let's celebrate our alikeness. And I really valued that statement because it really speaks volumes to, you know, where we're at today. And I would like to just, as I leave you now, I would like to just read you just one or two paragraphs from, of course, one of my favorite poems of hers called I Rise. Some of you, I am sure, have heard it, and some of you may not have. So I'm going to do my best to just read a couple of paragraphs from it for you. It's called Still I Rise. And I think that's dedicated to all of you out there, all the women who are still rising and will continue to rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like the dust I rise. Does my sadness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping through my living room. Just like the moon and the suns with the centuries of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. And we will continue to, we will continue to rise in a way that will bring forward all the values and the knowledge that our women intended. And I'm so excited to be here with all of you. And I know you're going to have a wonderful conversation that I'm sorry I can't be a part of right now. I have other things that I have to do. And I'm just really grateful that you have asked me to come forward and share this little bit of information with you, and wish you good words, and hold my hands up to each and every one of you. Honestly, I wish you great journeys and travels and great words as you move along in your lives to share those differences that we have and our likenesses. So Hajkasiyam from Musqueam, from my ancestors, from our women, and from our chief, Wayne Sparrow. So Hajkasiyam, thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. That was great. Thank you. That was beautifully said. We're so grateful that you could be. We're so grateful that you could be a part of this event today. It's always so inspiring to hear from you, and what an honor to hear. Thank you.
All right, take care now. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Deborah. Alrighty, I think we are now going to go over to Renée Sarojini Saklikar. I'm gonna pin you. That's all right. For the folks who don't know Renée, Renée is a passionate storyteller, the first poet laureate for the city of Surrey, curator of poetry series Lunch Poems at SFU and the Poetry Phone. Renée has been trained as a lawyer and is an instructor at SFU and BCC, and offers writing coach services, and has put together an online course geared to help creative people in precarious times. Renée's books include Listening to the Bees, that she co-authored with Dr. Mark Winston, that won the 2019 Gold Medal Independent Publishers Book Award, her groundbreaking poetry book about the bombing of Air India Flight 182, titled Children of Air India, won the Canadian Authors Association Poetry Prize, and her forthcoming sci-fi poetry epic, 10 years in the making, Thought J. Bap, to be released this year in 2021, which I'm so excited to hear more about. Renée will be performing a couple poems today. Renée, I'm so grateful that we get to hear your lovely poetry today. I'll let you take over now.
What a blessing to hear Deborah Sparrow's words and to be here with all of you. And if you can't hear me, or if there are any tech problems, our fabulous team of Rea and Jill at the museum, I know you'll send me a chat. I have my chat barred open. So I'm just going to get started. I'm so honored to be part of this conversation. And thank you all for coming on a glorious spring day, albeit in our continuing pandemic. So I think Ms. Sparrow really set the tone about what this 10-year project I've been working on lightly and gently touches on, which is reimagining my own background as an immigrant settler through epic fantasy. So I'm going to read you just a few poems from this massive work, and it's from book one. The book is called Brahma and the Beggar Boy, and each poem is a reflection on character and actions. We don't have time to go, heavy sigh of relief maybe from some of you, to go through all of it. So I'll use the poem as a starting point to introduce you a little to what I'm getting at in this epic fantasy, all written in poetry, and the characters. So let's get started. And I'm going to do a virtual background that I think works better. Let's see if I can find all my backgrounds here. No, they've all disappeared on me. No worries. We'll just do this. You can see my somewhat messy office. All right. I'm going to start with a really pivotal poem in this first book, Brahma and the Beggar Boy. It's called The Summons, Brahma on a Job. Now, Brahma is part British and part South Asian. Unlike me, I'm 100% South Asian, but she is a settler immigrant on unceded territory, and she's very aware of that, as are her people who are immigrant settlers. And they are in this imaginary Pacific Northwest called Pacifica, and she's a locksmith by training. She's an orphan. She doesn't understand her full background yet. That will be revealed later. She's actually semi-divine, a goddess, but she doesn't know it. She's apprenticed as a tradeswoman. She's a locksmith, and she had the great fortune to be brought up by an adopted grandma, who she thinks is her grandma. And that grandma was friends with a guy named Joseph P. Brahma, who's actually a real historical character. And he's a locksmith. And she gets an apprentice with him. And she is so skilled, nimble, fast, brown, brave, and beautiful. She gets quite a reputation. The world she lives in is controlled by a very evil consortium, a global economic, agricultural, administrative empire. Sound familiar? And climate change is happening at an accelerated pace. There's 5 eco-catastrophes, and this is in between and after many of them, and even a biocontagion. And so I was researching all this, writing these poems, particularly this first one that I'm about to read you, and our pandemic happened, and it was very surreal. And I think Rea is going to ask me some questions about that later. I'll get into this poem. So here we have Brahma, our hero. And with her in tow, if you can picture a little urchin boy, a beggar boy, nameless, almost utterly silent, a lot of orphans, a lot of boarders, a lot of refugees. And she befriends them. She's an interesting character because she makes her living off consortium, no doubt about it. She is an immigrant settler on hire to the evil consortium, but she's like a double agent. And whenever she can, she helps people out. And so she ends up bringing these orphans sometimes to grandma, who's a matriarch. There are a lot of matriarchs in my story. And the matriarch grandma and Brahma look after this beggar boy. So there they are, Brahma and the beggar boy, arriving at a perimeter place. Perimeter is a series of settlements all over the world controlled by the evil consortium. The summons, Brahma on a job. Every siren in perimeter sounded an alarm. On that day, arrival, although no one knew who they were, small woman with a boy. She from around here, asked the settlers, one by one. Their voices even toned, their eyes stone cold, gaze fixed on Brahma's well-oiled leather satchel. Usurpers, all of them. What response might they expect? Settlers at perimeter's edge. They wait, and we wait with them. Brahma's slant smile, radiance, a foil. Under her brown hands hidden from sight, her pippin file, her keys and her drill, codes, spells, chants to unlock any treasure. Street beggars, boys with a broom, girls with swords, from their bruised mouths, parched lips, masks torn away. Until the rains arrive and we survive, wash your hands, use your sleeve. Trust us now, you'll never have to grieve. At the 5th gate, transport drivers lounged, troop guards to inspect, their hands to scrounge. Brahma on contract, her face smooth as silk, that beggar boy trailing behind, that last drop of milk. And one of the things I'm doing in the book, which is organized by these key characters, so you've just met 2 of them through the eyes of these settlers outside the edge of perimeter in this place called Pacifica, controlled by the evil consortium. Sound familiar? One of the things I'm doing is what I think some of the best like old-time movie script writers do, or just script writers in general. You know how you hear about the characters before you meet them? So the following poem is called Overheard. It's one of my favorite. It's about Brahma, and it's in the voice of these settler women, impoverished, challenged. They're occupiers, and they're also oppressed, and they're on the edge of perimeter, and they're gossiping about this substitute locksmith that consortium has brought in because the locks on their doors never work. Overheard. Small, wiry, brown-skinned, yet British. Sly, too, quick, skilled with a lock and key, long, black hair, braids touching her leather pack sack, tools plus lasers, all the latest gadgets for openings. No lock that ever met her hands. Too tough or sticky. 1,000 scrapes, she'd dodge them all. One soldier from the before time even called her Kalo. No one ever knew why, just laughed. She collected nicknames, light year to portal, them hard ones, April or June, the worst. In the nick of time, a turner of bad odds, her body on the line of any fire, her cheek scarred. Smooth skin, though, and the softest lips. Tattoo on her arm, Ishmael Joe, and laughed. In the next poem, we see what I have introduced, which is Brahma bringing her grandma, the matriarch, yet another orphan, yet another mouth to feed. And here we have the beggar boy meets Brahma's grandmother. When Brahma brought the boy to grandmother, they both laughed. Not another one to feed. Oh, well, said grandmother, shaking her head. Come with me, boy. You can help carry seeds. So I'll just step out of this poem to tell you that one of the key things that Grandma is teaching these survivors and resistors against consortium to do is to save non-GMO seeds in between these terrible ecological disasters. And so things like glass and how to make glass, like a mason jar, become very important in saving seeds, the ones that haven't been tainted or through this accelerated climate change have not mutated into something poisonous or terrible. That beggar boy said not a word and looked at grandmother, those warm hands, that unlined skin. Grandma taught the beggar boy everyday magic. You know the kind, the way all doors and gates store their secrets, the way calendars contain codes, the way dawn and dusk, circles and lines might lead to 1,000 steps. One night, they walked past that carved portal gate. Grandmother took the boy's hand and shook kernels, red dawn, sequoia swirls, hard, spindle-shaped, seeds as thin as oatmeal flakes, fluttered down. Now they have many adventures, Brahma and the beggar boy, and they're cared for by these matriarchs and others. And they're diverse in gender and in backgrounds. They're all immigrant settlers, though, on other people's land, and they know that. And one of the things that happens is that when Brahma's on a contract, she finds out through the grapevine, basically through rhymes and chants of the beggar boys and the sword girls, about an old abandoned farmhouse and a treasure there. And the treasure is stored in a locked oak box. She figures it out. She's a great locksmith. She opens the lock. She's supposed to deliver all the goods in the oak box to the evil consortium. She doesn't. She and the beggar boy fool the guards, steal the oak box, and they're on the run with the resistors. But before they do, time seems to stand still when they open this oak box. Could it be magic? And inside they find an ancient parchment scroll in tatters. And there's a long story within a story in the tradition of the Arabian Nights. And I'm going to read you one poem from that story in the story. And it's about a woman named Dr. A.E. Anderson, who is seeking against consortium's orders to inoculate orphan children, migrant children, immigrant settler children against a terrible, biocontagion. And she is eventually arrested because she decides to give serum and vaccines to these children, and consortium doesn't want her to. There's a whole story I won't get into about that, but I thought you'd find her character interesting. And Brahma and the beggar boy are crouched. They're doing something they shouldn't do. They're not supposed to be reading this. They're crouched over this magic oak box inside this abandoned farmhouse. The guards they fooled. Who knows what the guards are doing outside? And they're reading. And here's one of the things they read about Dr. Anderson. So this is told in her voice. Of my grandmothers and my aunties, their voices call me, memories echo. Every one of them sang lamentations. I was born in the year 2020. And my auntie said, our seeds scattered to the wind, our glass jars shattered. For years, they kept our plantings hidden, as if it were a way station, as if there were a sounding well outside the city, verdant. A giant butterfly mutated who spoke. My aunties would make us walk up to Kerr Street. At dusk and at dawn, we'd look at the trees, sequoia. Those spindle kernels shake. My aunties would say ever after down in the town of towns, if forced to use your knees, assess all ground eventualities. They were banned, and to no avail. Warned my aunties when I was growing up, when consortium takes over portals, it don't matter if you're in Paris or Pacifica. Then they'd cough and laugh and peer down and stare hard. And then they'd say things like, everywhere the old river danger. After, the aunties would just laugh and cough. We never spoke of it. And our masks hung off our face, ripped, stained. So eventually they're on the run. Brahma and the beggar boy and grandma and these resistors and seed savers, they are on the run. They are in trouble. Consortium does not like what they are doing and have done. And they gather in tenements and outlier facilities, wherever they can find a space. They're pretty nomadic. And sometimes it's even as much in the summer months, or as summer as they know it after all this climate change, they gather in a campfire or circle, or sometimes when the big E, which is what they call electricity, is turned off, they sometimes have to gather by candlelight, usually made by beeswax, and they tell stories. And grandma is the biggest storyteller of all. No one can get a word in edgewise. Everyone else wants to tell their stories. She doesn't let them, but Brahma loves hearing her stories. And I've selected one of grandma's stories to share with you. And I know that Rea is keeping time on me. So Rea, you just let me know in the chat if it's time to go. Here's grandma's story, The Girl with Far-Seeing Eyes. This is a story recorded one day by that blind girl. Yeah, blind, she saw everything. And by Bloody-Eyed Jim, remember him? His hands all over things stolen, bartered, traded, androids, cracked laser plates, then Wi-Fi access codes give over to a guard, then stolen back by the trader, Jai Ishmael, great-grandson twice removed of, oh, well, never mind. Alas, when Auntie Pandy came, she took Jai Ishmael with him, and this story. All we got from him then was hacking coughs. We sat with him, but from a distance. You understand? Him on his big belly, no one to turn him over. Okay, I think I got 5 minutes and we're going to do some questions. So I'm going to end with a poem that appears at the very end of book 1. And remember, there's more books. It's an enormous saga. I've been working on it for 10 years. What an absolute honor to debut these poems with all of you. This is like one of the first times I've published them in little chapbooks by beautiful independent literary presses in BC and Ontario. But this is the first time like the book version is getting rolled out. And I got one more for you. And it's at the very end of the book, Brahma and the Beggar Boy, coming out from Nightwood Editions later this year. And it's called The Oracle of Gold and Green. Didn't I tell them then? Portal to portal, winter, spring, and fall. By the ferry to the island, round the campfire at midnight, candles left to burn. Didn't I call them then? azure light, no real darkness, and told them, come Midsummer's Eve. Didn't I show them then? Up at the farmhouse, high in the loft, messages sent bird by bird, winter, spring, and fall, beggar boys with brooms to sweep and to sing, sword girls to strike, sharp-skilled, long-limbed, each marked to bring. Us on the farm and us by the river, bring us the gold, keep green forever. Were we to stand under moonlight so bright, our faces shimmering, silver at night, right round our necks, 3 ribbons of red. Never forget us, even when we're dead. Ready to take questions?
Love it. Thank you so much. I'm just gonna add myself in the pin here. Thank you so much, Renée. That was absolutely beautiful. It's so special to witness your performance, even if it is online. I know the online like feels more removed, but I honestly, I think it's so mesmerizing to even be a witness to your beautiful poetry, and what a treat. This is the first time Renée is performing these poems, if I'm correct. Yeah, this was so special. Thank you. Renée, you mentioned COVID being part of the process for Thought JBAP. You mentioned climate change is one of the main themes. How did this, I'm curious, how did the writing for this book start 10 years ago? And then how did it evolve? I mean, that's a really long time period, 10 years.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity and the question. So when I started Thought JBAP, the heart of this journey bears all patterns. I love wordplay. And so Thought JBAP is what I always called it. Brahma and the Beggar Boy is just the first book. And Thought JBAP is just an acronym for the heart of this journey bears all patterns. I just love all punning and wording and getting all jiggy with the different cultures. And it was very much a more formal, poetic, long poem written in response to a series of poets, including the big guys that I adore, you know, Virgil and Chaucer and Shakespeare and Milton and T.S. Eliot, actually, whose book I have right beside me, The Four Quartets. And I was grieving the loss of the untimely death of my dad. And it was very much a process of doing a journey poem. And then it just took me deeper and deeper. I was writing Children of Air India at the same time. And there's this moment I have in my memory, like over 7 years ago, where I'm at a friend's place in South Surrey and we're walking. And I just stopped in my tracks. I was doing the proofing for Children of Air India, my first book. And I realized I can't do these 2 books at the same time. So this saga became a passion project of love and energy, because I was writing these terribly depressing, strikingly traumatic poems about my own family involvement in this act of terror. And so I would come to these poems, I think you can hear it in my voice, as a restorative practice. And the deeper I went with it, it's like this epic fantasy thing started taking over. And of course, I'm really into docupoetics and reading documents. And the more I read to inform myself of the kind of things I wanted to write, the more biocontagion and climate change, especially the small incremental changes that you kind of notice at the side of your eye in that New York Times article that you see when you're doom scrolling and you think, yeah, okay, but actually it's actually happening way faster. And that just started taking over my consciousness. And then the pandemic hit. And as some of you know, my husband's kind of involved in some of the health responses to the pandemic, and I'm left alone here self-isolating a lot. And it's been really hard, but the great restorative gift is my Thought JBAP. So I just went deeper and deeper, and the sci-fi fantasy just took over. And I have to give a big shout out to the many women, especially, and men who write in sci-fi and genre fiction. I'm very privileged to be on the board of the Surrey International Writers Conference. Big shout out to them. And I've just learned a lot from my students and from people like Jordan Peele with Get Out, and all the people working in the genre of epic fantasy. Hey, George R.R. Martin, Game of Thrones, Tolkien, etc. And I just started going really deep with that. And then that whole pandemic thing blended in. It's been very surreal.
It definitely feels very dystopic, for sure. Yeah, life kind of feels like I'm in a weird sci-fi epic. So I feel that. Could you talk a bit about the Canada project and or crossovers of Thought JBF and Canada question mark project. Why the question mark in between also?
Yeah, so important to get to that. So the Canada Project is my lifelong poem project. And I think Professor Stephen Collis from the Department of English is at SFU, the competitor university is here, and so many blessings. I have been so supported in this epic journey by people like Stephen Collis, who has a new book coming out as well. And there's been this generous supporting of me trying to figure out where I am as a long poem writer. And I've really learned a lot about how, what I'm actually about is this massive project. It's a lifelong project. If you want to look up Robin Blazer, The Holy Forest, I won't name drop too much, but there's a whole tradition, and Professor Stephen Collis has a lot of fabulous information about this. So the Canada Project is my lifelong poem chronicle, and everything I write goes into that. It's a chronicle, right? Like Bede's Chronicle, Renée Sarojini's Chronicle. I'm not actually that hubristic, but a little bit I am. I think you have to be as a woman putting down your lines in these epic genres. So the question mark is so very important and timely. So for me, and I just offer it humbly, I was very privileged to be a guest at UBC a couple of years ago to the Indian Residential Historical Dialogue Center. And, in my background as an immigrant settler, I had understood about truth and reconciliation through many personal journeys, partly because when my immigrant settler parents arrived to Canada, they got jobs with what was then the Department of Indian Affairs. And I grew up the first 5 years of my life not knowing what kind of Indian I was. And I talk about this in the notes to Brahman the Beggar Boy at the back of the book. And so I often would get the question growing up in Northern Quebec, in Northern Ontario, in Saskatchewan, surely I did. I've lived in all those provinces. What kind of Indian are you? Are you what? What kind of Indian are you? Where are you from? Right. And so Brahman the Beggar Boy and this whole sci-fi thing is really addressing that. But the Canada Project now has a question mark, because after I was privileged to spend an entire afternoon with some of the key curators and some of the elders there, it was a profound experience. And I realized the more I listened to poets like Jordan Abel and many others, Indigenous writers, I couldn't, just as an immigrant settler, call my project the Canada Project without disrupting it myself. So it's a very humble, small gesture, but I've put a question mark. I've redesigned the whole thing and I've fragmented it. And it's no longer the Canada Project. It's the Canada question mark project, because I'm just so acutely aware of how many of my colleagues who are Indigenous just deeply can't even say the word Canada, and so as a sign of respect and learning, it's just a small step and it's a journey. So there it is. Yeah,
Beautifully put. And where can we find Canada question mark project?
it's on the website. You just have to Google my name that growing up I was so embarrassed about. And now I'm like, Renée Sarojini, like Mary Jane. There's a fabulous, and I got that idea from Mary Robinette Cowell, who I adore. She's on Twitter. Go find her. She's the most amazing epic fantasy writer. She comes to the Surrey International Writers Conference a lot. I've been very gifted with having, to know her a little bit. And on her Twitter feed, she says, Mary Robinette, just like Mary Jane. And I'm like, Renée Sarojini, just like Mary Jane. So there it is, right? Like I'm fully trying to embrace that. So if you Google this strange name that hopefully you see on your screen and you Google Canada Project, you're going to find it.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'm going to ask you one last thing. Can we plug the poetry phone? Because I think it's so cool. I've been seeing ads about it. I mean, I've been following you for a long time, but like I saw the ads and I was like, we have to. Tell us about the poetry phone.
I will. It's Vancouver's first free, totally accessible poetry phone. So it's a project of the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association. They knew I was the curator of SFU's lunch poems at SFU. They approached me with, it's their idea, and a fabulous Irish Canadian programmer named Claire Warner approached me and said, we have this idea, they're doing something like this in Ireland, let's do it here, are you in? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Of course I'm in. So the Vancouver Poetry Phone is 10 local poets reading their poems. And all you got to do is dial 1-833-763-6763. 848. And we can maybe put that in the chat. And it's the Van Poetry phone, 1833 Poems for You. And we have poets like Jenica Harper, Joanne Arnott, many others. I'm just blanking right now, but I have a whole list of them. Charlie Deemers, Rachel Rose, Dina Del Bucchia, Otonia Julianne Okot-Bitek, Christine Bissonette, and Fiona Tinway Lamb. I may have missed some. We just had the budget for 10. There's so many others I wanted to put in the project, but hopefully we'll get funding for another go round. And yeah, you can dial that number and just at your leisure, listen to the poetry. Thank you for putting it in the chat. And if you have a disability or a situation that means you can't do that, all the poems and the recordings of the poets reading the poems are on the website. So you just have to Google Downtown Vancouver BIA and then go to Poetry Phone, and it's all there. It's beautifully set up. They're little bios of us. You can read the poem, all the stanzas, and you can click and you can see the poems being performed while they're being read, or you can, the old-fashioned dial is kind of cool. Thank you for asking about it. I love that project.
I do too. I love all your projects. All right. I think we'll go over to Hana now. Thank you so much, Renee. Hana, if you'd like to start your video. Thank you.
Hey.
Hana, I'm gonna add you here. How's it going?
It's going great. Beautiful, almost summer day. We're in denial that it's still early spring, but hey, why not?
I know. Hana is a longtime friend that I met at Emily Carr. For those of you who don't know, Hana Amani is a Sri Lankan-born visual artist and a future folklorist and an emerging curator based in Vancouver. She graduated from Emily Carr University of Art and Design, and her work focuses primarily on the politics, taboos, and identities of women of Asian Islamic descent. She recently curated an exhibition. It was titled "We Cast Spells on the Mothers of Our Daughters and Daughters of Our Mothers" at Center A, Vancouver International Center for Contemporary Asian Art. Her curatorial interests are committed to representing the works and voices of women of Asian descent in both North America and in Asia, as she has lived simultaneously between the two continents. And she is currently working on a very exciting project that explores ideas of the feminine and conscious in relation to ancient ocean mythology and the abyss. So interesting. Hana, your work is so detailed and just so stunning, as are you. Please tell us and show us a bit more of what you're currently working on.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. Thank you so much for having me here. I can't emphasize, especially after going to Emily Carr, honestly, it's even rare to have women of South Asian descent in the arts. It's difficult for us to get there due to many different reasons. I was lucky my family was a bit more liberal and allowed me to. And yeah, no, I grew up in Sri Lanka, and I think that's an important thing to mention for me, because I feel it has definitely impacted my practice. It's a place of so much spirituality, religion, but upheaval, chaos. There was always this primordial chaos going from war, politics, conflicts, and so forth. And so, yeah, it's definitely leaked into my practice. And I just want to elaborate how basically the show at Center A has funneled me into this new project of this feminine unconscious and the abyss. And so, yeah, so it was an exhibition over last summer, and it brought together 5 women artists of Asian Islamic descent who are somehow connected to that identity. And it explored themes of magic, superstition, ritual, and how this transforms and migrates through the diaspora. And I think this was so important to me because, and I love how Renée has these themes of the matriarch very strongly. I feel like I connect very deeply to that. I grew up in a household of very opinionated, vicious-mouthed, well-intentioned women. And my 2 grandmas, one was a literature fanatic and the other was a gemologist. So between the 2 of them, there was enough opinions, folklore, and legends to go around. The project I'm currently working on, which, like I said, kind of came out of this exhibition at Center A when I started to realize how much actually in the arts, even in Vancouver, women artists, in a way, can be very isolated or tokenized or put into certain categories. And so this personal project of mine, which I think I've been leaning towards for a long time, was exploring this feminine unconscious, this primordial chaos and so forth. And how it came about was a previous project I'd done was called Shahzadi's Dreams. And it was a printmaking project where I explored 3 different women in Abrahamic and Islamic texts, different texts. And so it was Shahzadi from the 1000 Arabian Nights. It was the Queen of Sheba, otherwise known as Bilqis. And it was Eve. And it was trying to break down and understand, these women play such an important role in the making of women, because when we grow up, we all hear these different stories and folklore. And so all of this, it connected me to many other women in Vancouver who were also under the same impression that, there is still a certain suppression in the arts and so forth. Anyway, carrying on, the Abyss project is a very personal project. As I said, I'm from Sri Lanka and I grew up near the ocean. And for me, the ocean is a place of the unconscious. It is a place where, many secrets are buried. There's shipwrecks, there's lives lost, there's lives taken. And I found this very interesting goddess, a Babylonian goddess called Tiamat. And she was basically this goddess of creation and primordial chaos. And I just want to read you something out of this book, which I've been looking into. It has a lot of different female spirits and demons. It's actually called A Field Guide to Demons, but I love it. And it goes into the history of Tiamat, who was, originally showed up in Mesopotamia. And it was very interesting because when the king Hammurabi came into power, he told the poet, I want you to rewrite the narrative of Tiamat. And what they did actually was they made okay, wait, I'm just going to find this right over here. Oh, yeah. So the story was retold. And initially Tiamat had all this power. She was, revered and really respected by the ancient Babylonians. But then when Hammurabi came in and said, okay, I want this kind of rewritten, what they did was they rewrote it, and the ancient goddess is seen as demonic in the eyes of the new hegemony, and where the male sun god defeats the dark feminine life force of chaos and creates civilization. So this to me was very interesting, and it's a line that kind of triggered this whole Abyss project, because it made me realize, like, our older knowledge, and I think Deborah also mentioned this, where women have this, a deep, unknown, unconscious knowledge that has been suppressed for generations throughout time. And I really wanted to go back, and with this idea of the Abyss was uncovering, who were these ancient goddesses? What was this feminine power that civilizations did respect? And, the idea of the supernatural woman and so forth. And so I'm very excited. I will show you a few of the pieces. It's more casual, so I don't have a slideshow or anything, but this is basically one of the first pieces I made. And it's a very personal piece. It's kind of exploring the deep and so forth. And
that's so beautiful. So beautiful. Could you leave it up for a bit longer? Oh my God.
Sure. Yeah.
And your nails. Yes. I love it.
I'm a bit of a detail freak, and I think that's what's so beautiful about the ocean. It's something that, what was most interesting when we talk about restorative practices as well, is that I think the pandemic gave me a chance to reflect and see things that were more personal to me in an artistic level, in senses of healing. And I know on social media right now, there's a huge explosion of energy and vibrancy, like, oh, it's all about the energy or the vibe. And it's actually a true thing. It's like, you get to be at one with your own energy, and it can be a scary thing. And so I think this collection has helped me navigate a lot of healing, looking to a lot of generational trauma. And when I say this is a pretty intense thing to say, but something that has been prevalent through my artistic practices, I always end up drawing fetuses, and I never knew why. But the more I thought about it, I started to realize, my grandma, she lost her first child 1 month after he was born. And it's something I think that has really affected her still to this day. And I believe, like, I'm a very emotional, very intense person. And I feel like, this memory, this longing, this melancholia, maybe it made its way through me. And so I made this one piece, and I was talking to her about it, and, she got very emotional about it. It was really cool. And I call it Embryo of the Sea. And it's basically like a little fetus in a shell. Yeah, these are some of the pieces I've been making. So this is exciting one. This is called the Medusa's Resurrection. And I find, jellyfish are so interesting, and cephalopods in general. So yeah, these are just a glimpse into some of the images. And another cool thing I thought is, I'm somebody who's usually, as an artist, I'm afraid of color. I'm primarily a printmaker, so I don't work with much color. But it's the first time I'm going into color, and it's so crazy because, when you think about the ocean on the top, you don't think about too much color, but the deeper you go, there's all this vibrancy. It's a iridescent, illuminated kingdom of all sorts of things that are still so unknown to us. And I think it's a perfect metaphor for this idea of women and the unconscious feminine knowledge. I think, under all this oppression, patriarchy, hegemony, all this stuff, there is this beautiful, very iridescent kingdom of natural, supernatural knowledge that has been taken away from us. And I think it's really cool to take a step back and explore and investigate these places. And I'll just show you one more and we can carry on. This is another one. Kind of like some sort of summoning. I call it like the summoning of Tiamat, because I believe it's important to find this feminine energy, this feminine chaos, and the world needs more feminine energy. Just it needs that. I think we have had a good dose of the patriarchy, and clearly it's not working out. It's not.
I love it so much, Hannah. It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. I think that is a wrap on the presentation component of the event. I'll be moving on to the Q&A section of the event now. I think I have some of my own questions written down that I'll start with, and I encourage all of your questions to come in through the chat. So please feel free to send them along, and I'll try my best to incorporate them in our conversation here. Hannah, someone's asking if you have a website.
I'm currently making my website, but and I know a couple of people are going to be laughing on this right now because that's the huge conversation. Have you made your website? I am making my website, but till then you can follow me on Instagram on Hana on Earth. That's me.
I'll write it in the chat.
Yeah. It will be done
Cool.
soon.
Hannah and Renee, thank you so much for sharing your voices, your insights today. It's so inspiring to see powerful brown women doing their thing. It was so nice to hear from both of you and learn a little bit more about what you're currently working on. I think the first question I want to ask you both is in line with our theme for today. What does the term restorative practice mean to you both? I think you've kind of answered this already, but specifically maybe either in your personal life and or through art, what does restorative practices mean to you?
To me, I mean, for me, I feel art, without art, I don't know where I would be. I think the best art I have made is through destruction, through chaos, through some sort of shift. And I think the pandemic will definitely lead to so many artists feeling this way, and along with personal life as well. But I do definitely believe, in these ideas of rebirth through art. I definitely feel that by looking at something in such a different way and creatively putting it out there, and you connect to so many other people through pain. And I think when I make art, it's definitely it's very vulnerable and fragile. And when people say, my art's not personal, I don't know how that's a possibility, to be honest, because how can it not be? It's an accumulation of your experiences, your life, your pain, and so forth. And that's why I think it's such a transformative and like restorative process. So that's how I feel about it anyway.
Yeah, I am drinking in, Hannah, your wisdom and your beautiful art. It's a great question. For me, it's about, I think what Hannah is saying, at least in this pandemic, it has been about making. So if I am making poems, making food, making love, it's about making, it's getting into that restorative space and the feminine and the female. This morning, there was a little group of blackhead chickadees singing their spring song. And I'm sure others feel this in this pandemic, just the simplest things of nature and beauty. And these chickadees outside my window, like I was entranced, and in the beginning of the pandemic, I'd be like doom scrolling, and I can still get into that mode. But if I make myself go out for a walk, and sometimes I have to make myself, I put on my mask and I'm lonely, I'm by myself, and my mom's in long-term care and all those things. But if I can go and I can find the smoothest stone that I can hold in my hand or see cherry blossoms, it sounds somewhat inane. I don't mean it in an inane way. I don't see myself that way. But I think what Hana was saying about this, sometimes I think as artists, particularly those of us that want to disrupt or invert or subvert, we can become so postmodernist that the simplest things that can become a kind of nihilistic denial. And I don't see that with judgment. I mean, but for me, the restoration, certainly now for me as a poet practicing, it is from beauty and the body. It is not just the intellect.
Beautiful. How does destruction and rebirth play into this practice, if at all?
Destruction is, in a way, I think, what makes you grow. And I feel like I'm somebody who really, I hold destruction very preciously in a way. I think I overthink, I ruminate, I'm very melancholic. I think Sri Lankans in general, we are very melancholic. We always seem to be long in something. So I think that has really helped me connect with people in a way. It's not only through empowerment in art, it's also through this destruction and being able to understand, you know what, I can take all these elements and facets, I can put it into something. It can be a healing thing. And I think it's also so important when you notice destructive traits in ancestral family lines to, as an artist, if you're able to identify that and creatively find a way to acknowledge and change that cycle, which is something I really do genuinely try to do. Because like every family, there's so many different toxic traits, all of us, the whole world, right? And that has been very interesting to me. It really makes me think, why am I like this? Why do I have an abandonment issue? Why do I have this? Why do I have that? It's because of something that previously happened, a memory that has not been dealt with, a ghost that has not been dealt with. So I think rebirth is so sacred in that aspect through art making. That's how I approach it, at least.
Yeah, so profound, drinking in every word, so much there that I'm going check. Just picking up on that, what struck me just in the moment of this expression was, as Asian women, the multifaceted nature of the goddess. So Kali, I have a little locket, I'm not wearing it, that my grandma, my Lakshmi Brahmin Hindu grandma, put around my neck, the gold locket with the goddess Kali chopping the head off the demon. And so the destruction that's also so regenerative, and Sarojini means in the folds of the lotus. So Lakshmi, and beauty and adornment and dance and music and wholeness and harmony, so that they are dual, they are Manichaeanly linked, the light and the dark, the shade and the sorrow, the joy. It's the life force. And this beautiful evocation by Hana of intergenerational melancholia, I think also the immigrant settler experience, if we truly start coming to terms with indigeneity and whose land we're on, and how can you not feel that, and also not give in to that destruction, turn it inwards. There are so many things to say on this, but to me it is absolutely a two-sided, Janus, the Greek god, the forward and back, and that you kind of have to have one with the other. They're always going to be dancing Shiva-like together. Yeah.
So beautifully put. Jill just sent in a question asking, with the anti-Asian racism so prevalent right now, how do your practices resist this while not erasing it? So I guess acknowledging racism, but yeah, without erasing it. The mirror work.
For me, I believe, like, at least my role as an artist, or even as an emerging curator, the way I act against racism is by trying to make space and bring more voices in, like, I think that's another problem in Vancouver, at least, in a lot of gallery culture. It has something to do with the trend, or like, oh, you're a conceptual artist or this or that. When I did that show, I won't say the name of who, but one of the artists were like, there's no space. And she was of Asian descent. She says, there's no space for me because I'm a woman, I'm Asian, and I do surreal art, and nobody is interested in that. I'm like, well, I'm very interested in that. And I don't prescribe to what I think, oh, this is what art should be, this is the norm, this is the trend. I think we need to make space. And I think that's what's so amazing about this conversation. This conversation is an act against that racism by celebrating, acknowledging, and bringing together, and having 3 women of Asian descent talking about this. Because if it was one of us, it's almost like, okay, that's that character on the game, the Monopoly game, or whatever it may be. But by having 3 of us, this is what makes it against racism. This is what, to bring in those voices, like, hey, we have a story, we exist, and we are humans. What is this craziness? That's how I feel about it.
So many things. Yeah, I feel I learn a lot by listening to Hana, and I thank you for that insight.
Likewise.
Oh, and I thank Jill for the question. Honestly, I have no ready answer to that. I feel one is called to witness, one is called to listen. I'm really conscious of my own blinders, the things I don't get when I'm impatient and judgmental. See, I was brought up the daughter of a United Church minister. Now, there's a certain generation of Canadians, you could say, well, my dad's a United Church minister, and it would mean something. I don't know if it resonates at all, but, I was brought up in a real kind of Mitchell Canadiana, right? You read the Globe and Mail, you listened to the CBC. Some of us even voted for that center-left party, and you were Canadian. But there was always a rejoicing celebration and also very traumatic, twisted, malfunctioning South Asian stuff going on all at the same time. And then my mom coming from a Sunni Muslim background and my dad from a Lakshmi Hindu background and then converting to Christianity. Whoa! So this idea of who are you? What kind of Indian are you? What kind of Asian are you? And what is racism? What is place? I think my work is an exploration of all these things. So an answer to Jill's question is, I don't know. All I can do is try and be compassionate in the moment. I have felt this pandemic, as derided perhaps as a certain slogan is, be kind, be calm. I mean, honestly, to be kind, to have compassion. Maybe that is the way. It's not to deny justice or not to have a sharp intellect. Anyone who knows me can perhaps discern that is there. But to have intellect and to resist, which is a very tight feeling and very linked to judgment, to do that and not have compassion, I think becomes very self-denying. But I don't want to sound conclusive about that. I'm very much on a journey about that.
I'm just soaking it all in. I'm like, yeah. On that note, I think being a South Asian woman in Canada myself, and having moved continents every 3 years personally of my life, I have constantly struggled with a confident answer to this question. So I'm asking you both, what does the word place mean to you, and what does the word home mean to you?
I think for me, well, home is very ambiguous, and I think we all share this mutual connection, which is so interesting. And it's even more ambiguous to me because my family, they're so mixed and they've just migrated between so many different places. My grandma, she grew up most of her life between Hong Kong and Japan. My dad also was in several places and came here with my whole family. And that's why I think folklore and mythology are so important to me, because for me, home was just this, it was like remnants and charms of culture that I have. It's how I grew up, and that is what has connected me to people. And I think I find home in people because I just feel like at this point we're so nomadic, right? And so that's what home for now is. And I think I'm also like too young to know what home is and where is. It's like I feel like I'm still building my house metaphorically. I'm like, I don't know where the roof is yet, and I don't know where it's settled yet, but it's a continuous, and especially being on the idea of, you know, unsettled lands, unceded territory, this changes the whole dynamic when you think about it, because it's like I'm on a place where even the people who belong to this place, how do they consider this, like with good faith or heart, a home? So home has changed so much with migration and all these colonization. Let us not mention that. Yeah, that's my thoughts on home. It's very complex.
Indeed. Just being with all of those. I love all those statements and that image, the image of building the house. No, we could just talk about that, but thank you for that nuanced question. It's such a wonderful rejoinder to the many, many, many hundreds of times, sometimes from the most beautiful people. Where are you from? Where are you from? You know, everything that Hana said, really. And, you know, I was born in Pune, the British called it, came to Canada as a little girl, lived all across Canada. For a long time, I would say my home was New Westminster, where I did a lot of my growing up, where my mom still is in long-term care, where my father is buried. And particularly with our Indigenous reawakening, truth and reconciliation, that has itself, become very fractured. What is home? What is place? On the other hand, I can tell you, I was really reflecting on this as Hana was speaking. Again, these chickadees outside my window and in my East Vancouver neighborhood, in Joyce Collingwood, very, very diverse, Philippine, Asian, all kinds of different waves of Asian, old time kind of Portuguese, Italian, working class, Catholic, you know, just very conscious of micro communities. So in the pandemic, I have, like, my home now is very defined as this shelter I am so grateful for. I am so grateful for running water and electricity and public health care. And it's made me like very uber conscious, forgive me for saying Uber, but, you know, just super conscious of, I am in my apartment right now. I am there all the time. So on the one hand, it is everything that we've said. On the other hand, it's incredibly right here, right now.
Definitely. Yeah. You've given me a lot to think about. I might steal some of your answers. I'm gonna prod at Hannah's mention of folklores. You both work with folklores and sci-fi, kind of, in your own ways. How do you define folklore, and what folklore specifically do you draw inspiration from?
For me personally, I mean, there's the noun of folklore. It's the customs, beliefs of, you know, different peoples and oral traditions. For me, folklore is like my grandmother praying at like 6 a.m. over my head and saying there's a demon, like you need to get this sorted out, don't go into the washroom. So folklore is all these like characters that make up your life and live through you. I think we are living folklore in a sense, and there's so many inspirations. I think something that has, like, being a girl, like, you know, Asian Islamic descent, something I've continuously grew up with this ideas of a spirit realm, which Deborah actually did mention. I really appreciated that. And this idea of jinns and demons and the duality between good and bad in this gray supernatural world. And I think that's where I draw a lot of my inspiration, because I don't believe anything is 100% evil or 100% good. And you need to understand both sides of these. And we can do that so much through our myths. I mean, it's also how you connect through people, like if through food, through these are all things that are passed through ancient traditions. And so, like, personally, some folklore that I go through is, I mean, I do love, like, you know, the Ramayana. I love a lot of Japanese history, folklore. I'm also like very invested now in a lot of Mexican folklore, as you might know, because my partner's from there. And you start to realize there's so many connections. There's so many, like, why do we have puppets in so many different countries? Why do we have, you know, ghazals, this, that, certain poetry, certain instruments? It is through folklore, through trade, that these were passed, and it what brings us together and what can make very specific deep connections. For me, I think that's why I love folklore so much. I think it's so important, especially now where oral history is not being shared to the capacity it was. And I think now more than ever, it's, I mean, it's on the internet, but it's not like everyone's like, oh, you should hear this tonight. And I grew up with all my grandparents. I was very lucky to enjoy all my grandparents, and they were always feeding me stories. And I was just, that's how I understood of the empowerment of powerful women and deities and gods. It was through my grandparents who would be telling me these stories. And that's what I believe my role is, to share these stories with people through art, especially now where I think people are looking and hungering for that sense of, you know, the mythology, and like, where did we come from? What was, because we're so distracted. We have, like, our values are all over the place. Not everyone, but we need that sense of, I don't know, that oral history that's getting lost, I think.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I love about this conversation, I hope it's working for our audience, is Rea's masterful mistress-like leaving of space for us. Because when Hana is speaking, honestly, you know, that's the whole evening's guzzle there in what you just said. I want to touch on a few things specifically for the work I've been doing. I've been really trying to do a fusion of the great Western sagas, Homer, Virgil, Chaucer. I read Shakespeare as a kind of a saga making, and, you know, well, there's the Henry plays, the Tudor plays, but like all the old white guys and their big sagas, and adore them. And also the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, also the Arabian Nights, and all that neo-colonial deconstruction of what is the Arabian Nights and Scheherazade. And I've put all of that in this poem. It's all mashed up and merged, and it's fantasy, you know. And so partly I've created my own folklore. I'm incredibly superstitious, and I know I get that from my Hindu side. I'm baptized and confirmed. I do consider myself a person of faith for all the terrible problems and issues, particularly in our country, with Indigenous people in the United Church. And it's very mixed up, you know. I also have a powerful bent towards an intellectual deconstruction of history. So it's all going on, and I want to embrace it all and not be shoved into a box. And I think for me, the folklore it's an act of resistance. So when Jill was asking earlier about resistance, here's my little example. This just come to me now. I don't know. I'm throwing it out here for everybody, okay? When I was studying English Lit at UBC, I was usually the only Asian woman in the class, and frequently the English professor, usually a white man, usually lovely, but still, you know, almost always. And they would always look up at me in September when we were doing the roll call and go, Miss Saklikar, are you sure you're in the right class? I can't tell you how many times that happened, or the number of times, even with my first book, many years later, so many years later, doing readings, and people would come up and just presume that English is not my first language. So folk tales and folklore for me is an act of resistance. And here's the theory I'm going to pump out. So, you know, when William the Conqueror conquered Anglo-Saxon England in 1066, and the Normans brought Norman law and the new Middle Ages. The Normans were the bad guys and the Anglo-Saxons were the resistors. And that's how I see folklore. Like whoever is the big official dominant consortium class, we underneath, we have our chants and our rhymes and our ballads, whether it's hip hop or our indigenous origin stories. Like there is always a counterculture that is creating their own folklore and myth in opposition to and stealing bits and trading. I love what Hannah said about trade. The taking of so much of Arab culture by everybody and then rebranding it as English culture. That's a really interesting phenomena. And I'm messing with all of that in my work.
I love how you said the rebranding. Like Sri Lanka was definitely rebranded multiple times. God.
Beautiful. What inspires you at the moment, and or what artworks and or texts heal you at the moment?
For me personally, this investigation into, a more ancient feminine energy and understanding, because growing up, I was surrounded by so many religions. Sri Lanka, has such a connection to Buddha and all this kind of ideas. But it's only now that I started researching more in depth, and I started, even the ideas of, there was a female Buddha. And then I found this very shocking fact to me that kind of gave me an existential crisis for like 6 months, maybe 3 months, because it was not 6, it was about 3 months ago. But I basically found that apparently before what we know as modern day Islam today, there was this goddess in the Arabian Peninsula that was called Al-Alat. And to me, that shocked me. That was a paradigm shift in my understandings of my own identity and culture. And I mean, I researched and I investigated. I'm like, I've spent so many times in like Islamic classes, but this was never brought up. Like it's very covered, it's very under the rug, and you can see that it's systematically taken out. It was once again turned towards the patriarchy. And I think, if more people knew that, if many young Muslim women knew that, that would change so much. And to me, that's been a huge impact on my work, my identity, and some texts that have been assisting me and inspiring me. I think this is amazing. I brought up the books. It's like the Woman's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets by Barbara G. Walker. I've been in a few feminist classes, and I'm so surprised that she has not come up. She's an amazing anthropologist, feminist, and so forth. And it's a whole, almost like a Bible of definitions of words that we use in, modern day culture that link to its more feminine origins, from Islam to like fauna to rose to gods, goddesses, chairs, carpets, you name it. And it's insane the amount of information I'm getting out of this that has very conveniently been hidden away. Another book is The Field Guide to Demonology. I have been enjoying that. And the last book I'll share with you is this book. It's called The High Priestess Never Marries, and it's by a Sri Lankan author, actually. Her name's Sharanya Manivanan. And I'm just going to read you the bottom. It's like, the women in this collection are choice makers, consequence facers, solitude seekers. They are lovers, vixens, wives to themselves, and their stories are just how that woman in the bar likes it, dirty, neat, and sexy as smoke. I was like, hell yeah. Like feminism 101, I'm down. That is what has been inspiring me. Just been enjoying actually my identity as a woman. I think it's the first time in my life that I'm really understanding that and being able to explore that. And it's been so refreshing and very shocking with that whole Al-Alat finding. That's what's been inspiring me recently.
Wow, I just so carried away on that response. Can you just repeat the question?
Of course, me too. Hannah, you just have a way of like speaking, so it's like so magnetic. I'm like entranced. Yeah. The question was, what are your current inspirations? What artworks or what texts heal you at the moment, make you feel alive?
Well, that's so interesting. I really want to hear if there's some audience questions. So there's so much I could say to that. I'm going to boil it down to two things. Because I guess I have been so deep into my own myth making and folklore writing and this whole 10-year project that I've gone so deep in this year. Because I curate a poetry series, I have stacks and stacks of poet books. So I'm generally reading whatever's the most recent poetry book. One book that has stood out for me this past year, though, of course, is Chantal Gibson's How She Read. And it was wonderful to see on Instagram, the Museum of Anthropology do a shout out for Chantal's book. And it's available in the bookstore and at the museum. And it's just a game changer, that book. I highly recommend it. I wrote an extensive review of the book for the Ormsby Review. Certainly the work of Octavia Butler. It's a very disturbing book. I don't know that it's healing me, but certainly during the pandemic, I've been reading it on Kindle, which I don't generally do, but I want it as an antidote. When I find my anxiety is really high in the morning, if our case numbers are bad or whatever, then I start doom scrolling, and to stop that and to become more restorative, I start reading Octavia Butler, and it's a very disturbing but beautifully written. It's called The Parable Sower. And yeah, I really go to women of color who are writing interesting reworkings of myth and epic fantasy. But I wanted to also say that it's about reading the micro-local. So you asked me this very interesting question of what texts are you reading? And like I say, if I started pulling out every poetry book, I would miss some and it would be a bad scene. And I'm looking at my micro-local environment, whether it's the chickadees or this $1.99 Safeway orchid that a neighbor gave my husband over 5 years ago when we were fighting to save a local school on the east side. And every year I nearly throw it out because it's so unprepossessing looking. And suddenly it bloomed this year in the pandemic. I cannot begin to tell you the joy this orchid brings. Who knows what its provenance is, but I'm trying to read my micro, local, humble environment. Today I Googled black-headed chickadee, like all the bird watchers in Rifle Bird Sanctuary going, duh. And I've been thinking it's a robin song. And of course it's the fabulously complex chickadee song, the two descending note song. And I've been really trying to read my environment, read my local environment. And I have found that so healing. I discovered a linden tree. I know a lot of people in Vancouver hate the linden trees because of all their sap, but of course bees adore linden tree, and I'm all about bees. I have this bee's nest somewhere in this on the outside of the eaves of this rental that I'm in, and queen bumblebees, I am not kidding you, 2 years in a row fly into my window. I have taken pictures, I've posted on Instagram, and I try and read the bees. I try and read my environment. Yeah, and I'm finding it really restorative.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love the idea of two queen bees. We've got one question from the audience. What does womanhood mean to you? What does it mean to be a woman or to be femme? And what does it mean to commemorate women with an International Day/month? I'd like to add that someone just wrote, we are watching two queen bees, and I think that is very true.
I think, I don't know, to me, to be a woman, it's such a gift, especially coming from a culture that, I mean, it's not the most favored to be a woman, but I mean, the product of who I am is so many other women. It's not just me. And, right now I feel like I'm at a point and to celebrate this femininity and to celebrate this privilege is to be able to live and and dissect this chaos and struggle and pain, because I feel like as women we inherit so much pain and trauma that it's up to us, if we're in these positions of privilege where like even having this conversation is opening so many doors. And I have so many younger cousins back home, a lot of them get married so early, their lives they're not the masters of their own lives. And for me to be a woman and to be able to master my own life and live that life, whether it's through art, creativity, or enable and empower in other women, I think that is the most powerful thing you can do as a woman. And I don't think I've ever been as happy till now, and it's taken a long time. My whole life I was like, oh man, if I was a boy this would be so much easier, like I wouldn't have to go, like even in like back home in Sri Lanka, cat calling, going out in public, like you feel like you're haram, you can't walk around like a normal living sentient being. So to be able to actually, and it's something I do appreciate about Vancouver, like I mean it's not perfect, but it's given me the opportunities and privilege to be the person I am and to extract myself from this cultural suppression that I otherwise would have faced and not been able to develop as an artist.
There's so much to reflect, and thank you to the audience member for that amazingly multifaceted question. I think I am in a huge rethinking of womanhood. I am very much wanting to step into the path of beauty and compassion married to intellect. I think a lot of smart women like me, I'm a lawyer by training, I take my neo-modernist poetics very seriously. We've forgotten to dance. We've forgotten about adornment. I shouldn't say we, I forgot to dance. I forgot about adornment. And compassion. It's hard to have compassion when there's such terrible things going on. And Hana has alluded to some of them. And how to get to that field that Rumi says, beyond right or wrong, there's a field and I'll meet you there, and how to get there and how to be whole. So I'm a series of question marks about womanhood and being an older woman, an older brown woman with silver hair, seeing my mom in long-term care, and the whole range. I love it when Hana references the grandmothers. I only knew one of my grandmas. I didn't even know my other grandma. And I never had all the aunties I write about and that I've created. I never had that personally. And so a lot of it is trying to see womanhood as an expansive practice that opens rather than shuts, because there's a lot of anger out there. And I think that anger is healthy. Anger is an energy, but it can become a very destructive force for me anyway. And so for me, my practice is to try and open, not close. That would be the essence for me of how I'm trying to explore my womanhood, is being more open.
Amazing. Beautifully put. I think we're running out of time at this point. So I'll end it there. That was a wonderful question to end it on as well. I'd like to thank all of you for coming and joining us today. And I'm again so grateful to have had the opportunity to talk with Renée and Hana. And I want to personally thank you too for your time, your insight, and for coming up with our theme for the evening. What a lovely time. Again, so inspiring to be amongst powerful brown women. Thank you, folks, and stay tuned for more events through MOA and the continuation of this series, Artists Unscripted. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you both.